صلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So we continue our commentary on Kitab Riyadh al-Salihin al-Hafidh al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and today we'll be beginning the chapter which is entitled Bab al-Amr Bab al-Amr bi-Ada' al-Amana. Bab al-Amr bi-Ada' al-Amana. Chapter, the ordering of the discharging of trusts or matters entrusted. So the word amana, which is often translated as trusts or something entrusted, is used to refer to a number of things. And sometimes it's used to refer to something which Allah has entrusted to His servants. And more often, it's used to refer to something that one human entrusts to another. So the first usage of the word amana refers to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted to His servants from the acts of worship that He has charged or tasked them with. The acts of worship He has charged or tasked them with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ahzab, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالَ فَأَبَيْنَ أَن يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَ مِنْهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانُ إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. Allah says what means we most certainly offered the trust to the believers. We offered the trust to the heavens and the earth. My apologies. And the mountains. But they all declined to bear it. But man boldly assumed the responsibility. For man is ever oppressive and ignorant of the consequences. Just want you to think about that for a second. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offered the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains. Three creatures that are not going to face judgment. وَمَعَ ذَلِكَ, they refused. They weren't interested in taking the responsibility from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But man did what? He boldly stepped forward and said, I'll do it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains why. إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. Because man is ever oppressive and ignorant. Ignorant of what? Of the consequences. He doesn't think things through, and he thinks he's bigger than what he really is and more capable than he really is. And as a consequence, he makes these types of decisions that he can't live up to. And as far as the trust here, it could be a tawheed, it could be al-ibadat in general, the acts of worship in general, it could be all of that, right? But al-muhim, this is an example of Allah entrusting man with something He charged him and tasked him with. The second meaning of al-amana refers to material trusts. Something what? Something material, something tangible that one person gives to another to look after. And ultimately look after and return it to the one to whom it belongs. And these material trusts can be divided into three categories. The first one is al-wadi'ah. Al-wadi'ah is basically something that is left in the care of someone else to be looked after and returned, and it is purely for the benefit of the owner. It's purely for the benefit of the owner. So for example, I'm going to go on a trip. I'm going to be gone for a long time, and I have a cat. And I say, Ma'ruf, will you watch my cat for me? I'm going to entrust my cat to you. Look after it. Give it this type of food. Give it water. Don't give it milk, right? They can't eat this, and this because it upsets their stomach, etc. Or I say I have cars. I want to park them in your driveway, and you look after these cars. That's an example of a wadi'ah. It's also a form of what? Trust. Who's going to benefit from that transaction? Me leaving my cat or leaving my car or leaving something else of value. Who's going to benefit? I'm going to benefit. The only person who benefits is what? The owner of the property. The second type of trust is what we call al-ariyah. Al-ariyah. Al-Ariya is an item which is lent, meaning given to someone who asks to borrow it. And this is left in the care of the borrower for the borrower to benefit from it. So this is a type of trust where the one who's going to benefit is not the owner, but the one who it's entrusted to, the one who borrowed it. That's what we call al-ariya. The last one is al-ayn al-mustajara. Al-ayn al-mustajara, which basically means it's some type of property or an item which is rented or leased, an item which is rented or leased. And this is something that you give to someone in exchange for what? A fee or a rate. Could be a daily rate or a weekly rate or a monthly rate. And in this case, both the one who is owning it, the property owner, and the one who it's been entrusted to, both of them will benefit. So these are the three types of what we call al-amanat al-maliyah, the material trusts. It's either going to be wadi'a, hey, can you watch this for me and I'll pick it up when I return? Or al-ariya, hey, can I borrow your cooking pots? I got a big gathering. I need those, those big cooking pots. Can I borrow them from you? Who's going to benefit? I'm going to benefit. And then last but not least is an ayn al-mustajara. Hey, can I lease your apartment? You're going to benefit and I'm going to benefit. The third category is leadership. Leadership positions and being placed in charge of others is also an amana. And this is the amana that holds the greatest responsibility. It has the greatest responsibility. It's the one that we should take the most seriously, although we should take all amana, every amana, take it very, very what? Very seriously. Inna Allah ya'mur an tu'addu al-amanati ila ahliha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders that when you are entrusted with something, that you fulfill the trust. Allah commands it. So you have to take an amana seriously. But you have to take particularly seriously the amana of leadership. And that doesn't matter if you've been placed in charge of what? A large group of people, like a nation state, or a community of people, right? A small section or segment of society. Or you've been placed in charge of what? Of a family. You become responsible for them, for their maslaha ad-dunyawiyya wal maslaha ad-diniyya. When you've been put in charge of some people, you become responsible for their material interests and for their spiritual or religious interests. So, for example, if there's money that has been given, right? Or even money that's been earned, that's going to be used to take care of them. You have to make sure that that money is spent appropriately. You have to be very, very what? Diligent in making sure that, hey, I'm being fiscally responsible here. Because why? I'm responsible for their material interests. I can't zig when I should zag and mess up everything for what? For these people I've been put in charge of. It's also true you're responsible for what they're spiritual and religious interests. You have to make sure that the things that you tell them that have something to do with the deen, those things are right. And if you're going to put them in front of somebody who's going to teach them the deen, you got to put them in front of somebody who's what? Who's qualified and capable, that won't teach them the wrong things. And you have to feel the weight of this responsibility all the time, because it is the greatest responsibility. It is the most important form of an amana. And I'm just going to give you some examples ala ujala about how some of the early Muslims, how they approached these types of things and how seriously they took the concept of amana, particularly the amana of leadership. So for example, famously Umar al-Khattab, who was the second caliph, and he was the one who oversaw the great expansion of Islam and Islamic territory. And during his time, the al-Islamiyya became what? It became very large and expansive. It wasn't like during the early period when it was like Medina and Mecca, right? And maybe a few other through areas in Jazir al-Arab, in just what? The Arabian Peninsula. That could easily be what? be reached and checked on. And reports could easily be transmitted back and forth. How are the people doing? But when the ummah became very, very expansive, he was visibly qaliq. He was visibly worried and concerned. He would spend the night awake. And one of the reasons when he was asked about this, or he told about this, he says, I'm worried that there may be in the outlying areas into which Islam has expanded, there may be roads which are not well paved. And there may be a camel walking along those roads that are not well paved. And what? That camel may lose its balance and hurt itself and hurt its rider. And I would be what? I would be responsible for that. Allahu Akbar. Y'all see that? Another example is the example of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, radiallahu anhu, who is, without exception, and by agreement of all the companions, the most knowledgeable member of the companions, and the most worthy of being the leader of Islam and the Islamic world after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. But Abu Bakr, a lot of times he would be asked about things that he probably had the answer to. And he would pause and he wouldn't answer. He wouldn't answer the questions out of fear of what? Of misleading or misguiding the people. And again, the most knowledgeable person in the entirety of, the Islamic world at that time, after its prophet. And he would hesitate to answer questions or to provide information if he wasn't 100% certain, fearing that he would what? Mislead the people who were following him. But ثم بعد ذلك, I want to mention one last individual who has to really, really be mindful of their responsibility, and that is parents. Many of you are parents, you have children, some of you have small children, you have children who are in school, some of you will ultimately be parents at some point. And one thing that we have to think about is this concept of being a leader and whoever you're in charge of being entrusted to you, and you being responsible for their material interests and their spiritual interests. And if you have to choose between one or the other, the more important one is obviously their spiritual interest. Consider the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, كل مولود يولد على الفطرة فأبواه يهودانه أو ينصرانه أو يمجسانه. He said, every child that is born upon fitrah, is born a Muslim. It is his parents who make him a Jew or a Christian or a fire worshiper or, God forbid, an atheist. Y'all see that? The Prophet hung that around whose neck? The child's neck? He hung it around what? The parents' neck. We have to be actively make an effort to make them Muslim. And if they keep them Muslim, I should say, keep them Muslim. And if they go astray, it'll be despite our best efforts, not due to what? Our efforts in the wrong direction. Y'all see that? Or our negligence. And I want to mention, I remember not long after I came back from studying, there was a very, very nice brother from the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And very, very nice brother, elder brother. And I remember sitting with him and him telling me, because he was like very active, he'd come to the masjid a lot. He was very active in the masjid. And he told me, I wasn't always like this, man. I wasn't always like this. He said, I came here and I didn't know anything about Islam. He said, I came to America, I think came in the 70s. He said, I didn't know anything about Islam. I didn't know prayer. I didn't know blah, 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 blah. And he said, he wasn't blaming his parents, but he just was telling me about how he came to such a pass. He said, when I was growing up in India, it was the dream of every parent, especially parents from like middle class or lower class families, for their child to go to America, go to University of America and study, go to University in Canada and study, go to University in the West, go to Oxford, right? UK. And he said, it was very competitive to get these. I don't know if they have like scholarships or a lottery or how it worked, right? But basically, you have to be the top of the best of the best. So he said most families would get tutors for their kids so that they would, get all A's in all their subjects and have a chance for one of these scholarships or to win the lottery, whatever it was. So he said, I would come home from school and I would have one tutor after another, one tutor after another, one tutor after another. And he said the first tutor that would come would be the math, and the next one would be the English, and then it would be this, and this. And he said the last one that would come, y'all want to take a guess? The dean, the one who would tutor the dean, the imam. He said, and by then I'm exhausted. I've been to school all day, and now I got tutor after tutor. He said, and the last person who would come every time, the last one on the schedule was what was the imam. So he said, when he came, I would just daydream. I would just daydream, or I would doze off, or I would just be clearly disinterested. And he said, I gave him the business. I gave him the business. And he said, also, I noticed that those tutors of math and science, etc., they were well paid, right? My parents paid them very well. And I would see, the things that they would give them, the money that they would give them to pay them. He said, but when it came to the imam, he said, we paid him with food, right? My mom would cook like biryani or something and give him that. That's how he would be paid, compensated, or we would pay him with old clothes. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't realize it was happening. I'm sure my parents didn't realize it was happening. But in this way, they created in me a very low opinion of religion. They made me feel that it wasn't important. And also a very low opinion of the religious people. That they are not people to be respected. They're people who are paid with food and old clothes. Y'all see that? And he said I had to come here and I had to experience certain things that I experienced to realize the value of deen. I had to leave India, a country with a lot of Muslims, not a Muslim dominant country, but a country with a lot of Muslims. A country where we have, mosques everywhere, 5 times prayer, everything. He said I had to leave a country and come to America and experience certain things I experienced and find the value of what? The value of deen. It's important, Ikhwan, that we realize some of the little things that we do are sending very, very big messages to our kids. You have parents who will be on top of their kids' head about their grades, but won't be on top of their head about salat. They won't ask them, did you pray? They'll see them go out, if they have a daughter, go out wearing what is not hijab. Or what can't even be remotely called hijab, or no hijab. Just paint on clothes, hair out, going out to the public school. Going out to the public high school. And those of us who grew up here and were non-Muslims, we know that is not the place where you send your daughter like that. A place full of wolves with silk tongues. They know exactly what to say. And our unsuspecting girls are going to that wolf's den. I say all this to say is that on top of the child's head about what? You got to get an A in this class. You're never going to get into a good school with those grades. But never ask them about the deen. Never encourage them to come to the masjid. Those who have young boys, you just never see them. They're in softball, they're in violin, they're in band, they're in soccer, they're in, you name the extracurricular activity that is recreational, social, they're in that. But they're not in anything that involves the masjid and getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are we doing with this amana? One of the greatest amana that a person can have is what? The amana of what? Of a child. And so I say all this to say that the amana is something important, something we need to focus on, and we'll be talking about over the next few weeks. I mentioned some of the hadith, but what I wanted to do today was just open up the topic and make us understand the significance of what we're going to talk about and the significance of an amana, how many of us have what? In our hand, the greatest amana. And maybe, perhaps we're not what? We're not giving it its due and fulfilling it the way we're supposed to fill it. Inna Allah ya'mur an tu'addu al-amanati ila ahliha. Allah has commanded that the trusts be fulfilled. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وجزاكم الله خير. تفضل معروف. Okay. Uh, I don't know if those two are connected. The second one, the one you mentioned from Nazi'at, um, right? أنتم أشد خلقا. It's like absolutely. Eh, I think for the first ayat al-Ahzab, it's like these creatures who are not going to be judged. They refused. They're not going to be judged. They don't have a ruh. They're not going to be recreated and judged and ultimately punished, or they refused, even though they weren't going to face the consequences, recognizing what it means to what? To worship Allah and to feel that pact or that covenant to worship Allah. And man didn't fully understand. I guess he didn't fully grasp the weightiness or the gravity of what he was doing. He just boldly rushed in, right? As they say, fools rush in, right? I think that's the meaning of the first verse. The second one is like for us to think that I guess to think too much of ourselves, to think that we always talk about like how people they talk back to God. They feel that, or they behave as if they feel that the wrath of God or the punishment of God will never what? Will never afflict them, will never touch them, will never affect them. And so it's as if Allah is saying, أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاء? Right? Do you really consider yourself a greater creation than what? Than the heavens, which Allah will ultimately do what? He will cause to crumble, and he'll what? He'll fold them up, and he'll manipulate them in whatever way he wills. So I think this is the meaning of the second one, that man thinks too much of himself. He thinks too highly of himself. He's very, very arrogant. And so he needs to be taken down a peg. I think it's similar to the passage in Surah Abasa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, min nutfatin, how does the verse go? Min nutfatin khalaqahu faqaddara. You were created from what? You were created from this fluid, which if it gets on your clothes, you're like, how can I get this off? You see what I'm saying? It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to what? Not trying to, but Allah is humbling man. I think that's the intention of the second one. For people who reflect, it's like, we're not like the mountains, we're not like the heavens, we're not like these greater creatures of Allah. Go ahead, Naeem. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Hey. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hey. Well, the problem with that logic, let's start with the logic first, and then we'll go to answer your question. The problem with that logic is, if we do as the other people do, we'll suffer the same fate as the other people. So if we're all in agreement that these people are non-Muslims, and if Allah doesn't have mercy upon them, their behavior will land them in hell. If we're believing that, if we're accepting that premise, and if we as Muslims then say, well, we should just do like they do, then we have to understand that if we do what they do, which is going to lead to X consequence, we'll share the same fate. The whole reason why we do something different, we do differently, is because we don't want to share the same fate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, he says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. There's, and this is at a time when the Muslims were in Mecca and many of them were being persecuted because they were practicing Islam. It wasn't safe for a lot of them. The Prophet told them to him, the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, the Prophet, and by extension the believers, to muster the intestinal fortitude, to stand firm on their faith and to call the people who are oppressing them disbelievers. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Say, oh you disbelievers. Call them what they are to their face without fear. And then tell them, لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. I don't worship what you worship. I don't worship the way you worship. Then he says at the end, لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. You have your way and I have mine. The believer is not supposed to imitate the non-Muslims. Do what they do. Walk the way they walk, talk the way they talk, dress the way they dress, behave the way they behave. The Muslims not supposed to do. We're supposed to be different. The Prophet has countless hadith where he says, خَالِفُ الْيَهُودِ وَالنَّصَارَى. خَالِفُ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Be different from the Jews and Christians. Be different from the pagans. Be different from the non-Muslims. And so that logic right there is not an Islamic logic. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if your daughter is living in your house and she's under your care, then yeah, you have the say. And by extension, your daughter's daughter is your daughter. I wouldn't recommend, forcing a scarf on her head, right? And I wouldn't recommend, getting into a shouting match with your daughter. But you reason with your daughter and you let her know, you're like, look, this is the right thing. You try to reason with her and talk to her reasonably. You try to convince her with convincing arguments, but at the same time, you tell her, uh-huh. Mm-hmm. 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 So it's okay to say, look, this is my house, and this is the way I want you to function within my house, because ultimately I don't want to be held accountable for the things that you do. You have that authority. And I would use that authority without doing or saying anything that could have the opposite negative effect. We just live in a time where people are so sensitive, and if you tell them the right thing, but you don't tell them you tell them the wrong way, and sometimes you can't even. It's just so hard to navigate people's delicate sensibilities. But be firm, but be gentle at the same time. If you can find that balance, like, look, you're living in my house. This is the way you're going to have to conduct yourself in my house. I can't say what you do outside of it, but I'm going to be held accountable. And at the very least, you have to tell, because the Prophet told us in the Quran. The Prophet told us in the Hadith. He said, whoever amongst you sees somebody doing something wrong, you have to what? Change it with your hands. When you have the authority, right? Sometimes you have the authority, but wisdom says, don't change it with your hand. The harm that could be caused is greater than the benefit. So then the Prophet says, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. Gotta what? Gotta say it. Gotta say it. And so what I would encourage is saying it in this way, saying, look, we've had these discussions ad nauseum. It's not getting through to you. So I'm gonna give you an ultimatum. Look, you're gonna be in this house. This is how we do things. When women leave, women who are pubescent and adult, when they leave the house in what? In proper hijab. That's the way it works. If we can't do that, then we have to part ways. You know what I mean? We can't. That's what I would say, Naeem, about that. And may Allah bless you for doing the best you can, man. This is your daughter. You want to take care of your daughter and look after your daughter, and I respect that. And may Allah bless you for that. And may Allah open her heart to see the truth of what you're saying. And it's hard with these kids too, because they want to fit in. They really want to fit in, and they're struggling. They're up against it. But at the same time, we have to teach our kids. To be independent thinkers, to be independent minded, to believe. And a lot of the failure It's not that we're not telling them the right thing, but we're not telling them the why. When you know the why, you're more likely to comply, right? If you notice in the passage in Surah Al-Kahf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about Musa accompanying Al-Khidr. Every time Al-Khidr did something, Musa was like asking him, basically like why'd you do that? Right? And Khidr explained at the beginning, Al-Khidr explained at the beginning why he didn't want him to accompany him. He said, وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. He said, how are you going to be able to be patient when you don't know the why? You're going to see me do things you don't fully understand, and you're not going to be able to be patient. You're not going to be able to just go with it because you don't know the why. And so that's another thing too. I think we have to do as parents. We have to do a better job of conveying the why. And it takes a lot of patience because these kids are not even the kids, man, even the adults now, super sensitive. You can't tell them anything. You can't tell them anything without them getting mad and storming off or developing an aversion, hating you for telling them the right thing. So different, 180 degrees out of phase from the early Muslims. Umar al-Khattab, this great man, very knowledgeable companion, second caliph, the prophet, he's the person that the prophet said, if there was going to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar. He didn't say Abu Bakr, he said Umar. This man, sometimes people would correct him. And he was the type, an imposing figure. Very strong, very big. And he's the type of person who, when he comes in the room, people put their head down like, hey, I don't want to make you mad. This person, people would correct him. And when they corrected him, he didn't raise his hand to strike them down. He said, Rahim Allahu mra'an ahda ilayya uyubi. He would say, may Allah have mercy, would make dua. May Allah have mercy on the one who has given my gifts my faults as a gift. But it's a different time, man. People don't want to be told those types of things. And so I know it's hard, and keep doing what you're doing, Akhi. May Allah bless you for that and give you an immense reward for just trying. And at the same time, may Allah want to open the heart of your daughter and your granddaughter so that they will practice this very important part of Islam. Anything else? Keep them in your dua. Yeah. Subhanallah. That's another thing too, the dua of the parent for the child. Just keep making dua for them. Keep making dua for them. Anything else? Going once? تفضل Hussein. Hey. أعوذ بالله. Okay. أعوذ بالله. Mm.
And out of school, I go get drink, do a lot of bad things. Since I've been in school, being Muslim, starting over, the teacher have been teaching me a lot. But since I've been a Muslim, I've been respecting my parents.
Mm.
So I think Islam has very good positive impact on me, on my daily living. The principal said, okay, if all the students could behave that way, we would have less stress to work on the security of the school and also on the behavior of. So the impact of Islam on the students is very important. Talk to them slowly, nicely, try to convince them because it's the fact. The school will cook, the peer pressure will cook,